All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah, we're mainly focusing on book on, of the understanding.
Right.
But we'll be pulling in some stuff from books 2 and 3 along the way, too.
Sounds good.
Goal is to untangle some of Hume's key insights about, well, how we understand the world, ourselves, even morality.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it really is. So one of the things that makes Hume so fascinating is how he takes this experimental method and applies it to philosophy.
It's almost like he's saying, look, let's stop with all the abstract speculation and actually look at how our minds work based on what we can observe.
Exactly. He's all about grounding these really big concepts in experience.
An observation, yeah.
And he wasn't afraid to, push the boundaries a bit.
Oh, absolutely, especially for the time period he was writing in. I mean, that quote in the book advertisement, it's basically saying, let me think what I want and say what I think.
Which, in the 18th century, that was kind of a risky statement.
Yeah. Not a popular opinion. Rara temporum, felicitas, ubi sentire quae vilis, and quae senties, dicere licet. It is a rare fortune of the times when one may think what one likes and say what one thinks.
Right. Talk about a bold move. But, it really shows his commitment to really examining the mind with a critical eye.
Yeah, and he even kind of encourages his readers to do the same, to really engage with his work and look for those, the inconsistencies and gaps in his own thinking.
Oh, right. Like with that note about the index.
Exactly, yeah. The editor points out that Hume actually designed the index to highlight those inconsistencies, those places where his arguments maybe weren't perfectly airtight. It's like he's inviting the reader to spot the flaws and join the debate.
I love that. It shows a real dedication to intellectual honesty and really pushing the boundaries of thought.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of Hume's philosophy. Where does he even begin with this exploration of the mind?
Well, he starts with a really important distinction: impressions and ideas. So think of impressions as those vivid, immediate sensations we get from the world.
Okay.
The feeling of the sun on your skin, the taste of chocolate, the sound of music.
Got it.
Those are impressions, the raw data of your experience.
Like the building blocks of how we experience everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then ideas are those fainter copies of those impressions that linger in our minds afterwards.
So they're kind of like echoes of those original sensations.
Exactly, yeah. Just a bit more faint, a bit less intense.
All right, I'm with you so far. Impressions, ideas. Got it.
Good.
But how does this seemingly simple distinction lead to some of Hume's more radical conclusions, like his skepticism about cause and effect?
Ah, yes. That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
So let's use an everyday example. You see a billiard ball rolling across the table and hitting another ball, and that second ball starts moving.
Right.
We instinctively say the first ball caused the second ball to move.
Seems obvious, right?
It does. But Hume argues that we're not actually observing the cause itself. We're just observing a sequence of events. The first ball moving, the contact, the second ball moving. We don't actually see the force, the cause that makes the second ball move.
So what you're saying is that our belief in cause and effect, this idea that one thing makes another thing happen,
Right,
is really just like an assumption.
well, more like a habit of the mind.
A habit.
Yeah. Hume says it comes from custom and habit, not from some ironclad logical proof. We see events happening together repeatedly, so we start to expect that pattern to continue.
We assume they're connected because they always happen together, but...
But can we really be certain that the future will always resemble the past?
Whoa.
That's the question Hume raises.
That's a pretty mind-bending thought, I have to say.
It is.
If we can't be totally sure about cause and effect...
Then what does that say about our understanding of the world?
Exactly. Like, how much of what we believe is actually just based on, shaky ground?
That's one of the big questions Hume wants us to grapple with.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Starting to see why Hume is considered such a philosophical heavyweight.
He really shakes things up.
He really does. Now, I know he also had some pretty fascinating things to say about the nature of belief itself.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So how does that fit into all of this?
So for Hume, belief isn't just a simple mental yes or no to a proposition.
It's more than just saying, yeah, I believe that.
Right.
It's got to be more than that.
Exactly. He defines it as a lively idea related to a present impression. Think about it this way. You have a picture of a loved one on your desk.
Okay.
You look at that picture, and it triggers memories,
Yeah.
emotions, all sorts of feelings that make your belief in that person's existence feel stronger, even though they're not physically there.
It's like the picture makes that belief feel more real, more present.
Exactly. And Hume says this applies to all sorts of beliefs, even those that seem abstract or intangible.
Hmm.
Like, think about superstitious practices.
Oh, like Lucky Charms and things like that.
Right. Why do people carry those around? Because by associating a physical object, that present impression, with an abstract belief, they make that belief feel more, well, believable.
It's like the object becomes a way to anchor that belief, make it feel more concrete.
That's the idea.
Okay, now that is really interesting.
And this leads us to one of Hume's most radical and maybe even a little unsettling ideas.
Oh boy, here we go.
The idea that there is no continuous, unchanging self.
Wait, what? No self, you mean?
He's saying that what we call self is really just a bundle of constantly changing perceptions, a stream of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are always in flux.
So there's no little me inside my head calling the shots. It's just a bunch of mental events happening.
That's the radical conclusion Hume comes to, and it really challenges those traditional notions of personal identity.
So, like, if there's no fixed self, then what does it even mean to be a person?
That's exactly the question Hume wants us to ask.
And how do we account for the fact that we feel like the same person from one day to the next?
Well, Hume would say that's our imagination playing tricks on us. Because we experience a stream of similar perceptions, our minds naturally try to impose a sense of continuity on them.
It's like we're creating a story, a narrative, to make sense of all these changing experiences.
Exactly. It's like watching a film, a series of still frames that create the illusion of motion. Our self is kind of like that, a mental film we project to create a sense of coherence.
So my sense of me is really just a very elaborate story my mind is telling itself. That's kind of wild.
It is wild, and it opens up a whole can of worms about how we understand consciousness, personal responsibility, all sorts of things.
Okay, I can already tell this is going to be a deep dive I won't soon forget.
We're just getting started. Next time, we'll delve into Hume's exploration of passions. You know, all those messy emotions that drive our thoughts and actions.
Can't wait. Bring on the feels.
We'll see what Hume has to say about that complex world of human emotions.
Okay, so we're back and ready to jump into Book 2 of Hume's Treatise.
Where things get a little more, shall we say, heated.
Yeah, we're talking about passion.
Right, the emotions, the feelings that really drive us.
It's like opening up Pandora's box.
A bit. But instead of unleashing chaos, we're getting this really insightful look into how our emotions work.
Exactly. And Hume starts off with some pretty fundamental ones. Pride and humility.
You know, you might think he'd see pride as a good thing and humility as a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Like most philosophers of his time.
Yeah, that's what I would have assumed.
But Hume, he's different.
How so?
Well, he doesn't necessarily see them as good or bad. He links them more to pleasure and pain. Specifically, how we experience those feelings in relation to ourselves.
So it's not just about feeling proud or humble, it's about what those emotions tell us about how we see ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. He observes that both pride and humility have these two main components. First, they have an object, and that object is always the self.
Okay.
And second, they involve a distinct sensation, either pleasant or painful. So let's say you win a competition. That achievement, it triggers this feeling of pleasure, right?
Yeah.
A positive sensation.
Yeah.
And that sensation gets linked to the idea of yourself as the winner.
Like, I did that. I succeeded.
Right. And that connection between the pleasurable sensation and the idea of yourself, that's what makes up the emotion of pride.
Interesting. So it's not just feeling good about winning, it's about how that win makes me feel about myself.
Exactly. It all ties back to those impressions and ideas we talked about earlier.
Right.
The feeling of pleasure from winning. That's the impression.
Got it.
And the idea of yourself as capable, successful, that's the idea that gets reinforced by that impression.
It's almost like our experiences are constantly shaping how we see ourselves.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, this is making me rethink how I view, like, all these emotions. It's not just about feeling them, it's about understanding what's going on beneath the surface.
Hume's all about getting to that deeper level.
He really is. But what about some of those other big emotions, like love and hate? How do those fit into this whole framework?
Well, for Hume, love and hate aren't just, these fleeting feelings. They're these powerful forces that shape our actions, how we treat other people.
So they're not passive, they actually motivate us to do things.
Right. He argues that love, at its core, is this desire for the happiness of another person.
Interesting.
While hatred is, well, the opposite, a desire for their misery.
Wow, okay, that's pretty intense.
It is. But Hume's just laying it out there, the raw truth of those emotions.
So if I love someone, it means I'm not just feeling all warm and fuzzy. I actually want them to be happy.
Exactly. You're invested in their well-being. And if you hate someone, well, you want the opposite for them.
That's a bit of a darker side to those emotions.
It is, but of course, this doesn't mean that everyone who feels love or hate acts on those desires, right?
Right, right.
We have reason, self-control, all sorts of things that can help us moderate those impulses.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah. But those desires are still there, simmering beneath the surface.
Thanks you think. But what about those situations where you feel a connection to someone? Like, you feel empathy for them, even if you don't necessarily love them or even like them.
That's where Hume's concept of sympathy comes in.
Oh, yeah, sympathy.
He sees it as this bridge between people, this ability to share in the feelings of others, even if we haven't experienced the same things they have.
So it's like stepping outside of your own little bubble and feeling what someone else is feeling.
Exactly. It's what allows us to connect with someone who's going through a tough time, to feel compassion for those who are suffering.
Even if we don't know them personally.
Right. And Hume makes this really interesting point that we can even feel sympathy for people we disagree with, people we might even consider enemies.
That's kind of surprising, isn't it?
It is, but it shows that our emotions aren't always so black and white. There's this potential for connection and understanding, even in the midst of conflict.
Okay, now that is a really powerful idea.
It is.
So how does all of this talk about passions, about love, hate, sympathy, connect to Hume's views on morality?
Good question. This is where things get even more interesting.
I'm ready.
So, you see, Hume argues that morality isn't just based on reason. He's famous for saying that reason can tell us what is,
Okay.
but it can't tell us what ought to be.
So, like, reason can help us understand the facts of a situation, but can't tell us what's right or wrong.
Exactly. He thinks we have this innate moral sense, this ability to perceive virtue and vice based on the feelings they evoke in us.
So our sense of right and wrong is based on feelings, not logic.
Well, it's more like our emotions are acting as this kind of internal compass.
Guiding our moral judgments.
Right. So when you see someone being kind, you feel this sense of approval, a positive feeling.
Okay.
And when you see someone being cruel, you feel disgust, a negative feeling.
Interesting. So our emotional response is like telling us what's good and what's bad.
That's the idea. And Hume thought this moral sense was universal, a fundamental part of human nature.
So we're all born with this ability to feel what's right and wrong.
That was his view.
But doesn't that mean our morals are, like, subjective? Just based on how we feel in the moment?
That's a great question. And yeah, Hume recognized that our emotions can be fickle,
Yeah, forgetting.
influenced by all sorts of things.
Right.
But he also argued that there's this underlying consistency to our moral sentiments. Like actions that promote harmony, well-being, those tend to evoke positive feelings.
Okay.
While actions that cause harm, suffering, those tend to evoke negative feelings. So there's this kind of rationality to our emotional responses.
So it's not totally random. Our moral sense is shaped by what our nature as social creatures.
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Wow, okay. So much to think about here.
There is. And this leads us to another one of Hume's more radical ideas. Justice, he argues, is a human invention.
Wait, what? Justice is invented?
He doesn't see it as this natural law handed down from on high. It's a convention that arises out of human society.
Yeah. So, like, our entire legal system, all those laws are just made up?
Well, not made up in the sense being meaningless or arbitrary.
Okay.
Hume argues that justice is a necessary solution to a very human problem. Scarcity.
Right, not enough resources to go around.
Exactly.
So we have to figure out how to share.
And we have these conflicting self-interests.
We all want what's best for ourselves.
Right. And without rules, without some system of justice,
Yeah.
things would just, descend into chaos.
So justice is like a way to manage all those competing desires, make sure everyone gets a fair shake.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a system we agree to uphold because it benefits everyone in the long run.
But if it's just an invention, does that make it less important, less binding?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of Hume's thinking about reason, sentiment, morality, all of it.
Okay.
He's saying that even though our morals are rooted in feelings, that doesn't make them any less real.
Or any less powerful in shaping how we act.
Exactly. Our emotions, those sentiments, they're part of what makes us human, and they play a huge role in how we act, how we understand the world.
This is all so incredibly fascinating. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are. There's so much more to explore. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to look at Hume's analysis of greatness of mind.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing.
And how this idea of comparison, how we constantly measure ourselves against others, influences our pride and humility.
I can't wait to dive into that.
It's a good one.
All right, back for more Hume. My brain is already doing backflips from all those ideas about passions and morality.
I know, right? It's pretty intense stuff.
It is. So what's next on this philosophical roller coaster?
Well, we're going to keep rolling with Book 3 of the Treatise.
Okay.
And get into some really practical concepts. Things like promises, keeping your word.
Okay.
Allegiance, like loyalty to a government.
Got it.
And how all that ties into, justice and those social contracts we talked about.
So this is where Hume gets into like the nitty-gritty of how societies actually work.
Exactly. And his approach to all this is, well, very Humean, I guess you could say. Meaning he's not really concerned with grand, abstract ideals.
He's a pragmatist.
Very much so. So when he looks at promises, for example, he doesn't see them as these sacred oaths.
Okay.
He sees them as conventions, agreements we make because they benefit us.
So it's less about some kind of moral absolute and more about like, hey, this makes life easier for everyone.
Exactly. Keeping promises builds trust, encourages cooperation.
Which makes society function better.
Right. It creates a more predictable, stable environment.
Makes sense. So how does this whole idea of practical benefit apply to things like allegiance to governments? Is it just about obeying the law so you don't get punished?
Well, it might start there, but Hume argues that it goes deeper over time.
Okay.
Like those social conventions, the laws, the institutions, they become internalized.
We start to believe in them.
In a way, yeah. We develop a sense of duty, of obligation to uphold them, even when it might not be, personally convenient.
So we might start following the rules out of self-interest, but then those rules become part of our morality.
That's the idea. We develop a conscience.
Huh. It's like we create these systems for practical reasons, but then those systems shape us.
It's a fascinating interplay, isn't it?
It is. And this all circles back to Hume's thoughts on justice.
Absolutely.
How does that all connect?
Well, remember how we talked about justice being a human invention?
Yeah.
He applies that same thinking to property rights.
So owning stuff isn't like this natural right.
Not according to Hume.
Yeah.
He sees it as another convention, something we've created to solve problems.
What kind of problems?
The problems that come with, scarcity.
Not enough to go around for everyone.
Right. And without property rights, there'd be constant conflict over resources.
People fighting over who gets what.
Exactly. So property rights, as artificial as they might seem, help to prevent all that chaos.
So we've basically created the system to make sure everyone has a fair shot at getting the things they need.
That's one way to think about it.
But if it's all just made up, doesn't that mean we could just change the rules whenever we want?
Well, that's where things get tricky. Hume sees the importance of stability in society.
Right.
Constantly changing the rules would just create more uncertainty, more chaos.
Yeah.
So it's about finding that balance.
Between having rules and being flexible.
Exactly. Recognizing that these social agreements, these conventions, they serve a vital purpose. They're not perfect, but they help us live together peacefully.
It's like we're always trying to figure out the best way to live together.
That's a big part of it.
Wow. Hume really makes you think about all these things we usually take for granted.
He does. And, that's one of the things that makes diving into philosophy so rewarding.
Totally agree. This whole deep dive into a treatise of human nature has been amazing.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's like Hume's given us this new way of looking at the world, at ourselves, at how everything fits together.
That's the power of a great thinker like Hume.
So to everyone listening, if you want a real intellectual adventure, check out Hume's treatise.
It'll definitely make you think.
It will, and that's what we're all about here, right?
Yeah.
Challenging assumptions, expanding perspectives, all that good stuff.
Exactly. So keep those minds curious, keep those deep dives going, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.